Hello, my name is Connor Thomas. This is a presentation on the Glorious Revolution of 1868 in Spain for Bowling Green State University, Dr. Michael Brooks, History 6320. So let's get started. Okay, so Spain's political history, especially in the 19th century, is definitely not, I would not use the word stable to describe it. It is marked by a lot of changes to constitutions or new constitutions or attempts at a coup or successful coups, um, sometimes having a king, sometimes not, intervention from outside forces. So it's a very complicated one. Um, yeah, there are 8 attempts at a constitution before this in 1868, um, all with varying degrees of reform, certain political rights, sometimes included, sometimes not. Napoleon's invasion of Spain, 1808, and the ensuing Peninsular War was a large disruption to Spanish political life and the health of the government. Um, by 1813, though, the defeat of Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, brings us to a big change. So the Constitution of 1812, there are some reforms made dealing with the issues from Napoleon's invasion, especially, there's a big disruption, especially economic disruption. And the Constitution of 1812 attempts to calm things down, provide some stability. We get in 1814 the return of King Ferdinand VII, who gets rid of this constitution. So this is a good example of what goes on in 19th century Spain. Of we see some reforms made, and then immediately they're gone or changed. At the same time, over in North and South America and the Caribbean, Spain's colonies are, not all at the same time, but they are experiencing increases in independence sentiments and then wars that lead to their independence. So that's a huge disruption to Spain's political and economic stability. The picture on the screen is the promulgation of that 1812 Constitution. So it is just an example, again, of, it seems like it's a big change, and it is, but then it's gone. Another big development in 19th century Spanish social and political health are 2 Carlist wars. The first being from 1833 to 1840, and the second, much smaller one, and mostly more confined to Catalonia and northeastern Spain, 1846 to 49. So these wars were a part of the ongoing debate, if you can call it that, of who is going to be running Spain. Not just the structure of Spain's government, but there was no real attempt to, get rid of the monarchy entirely at this point, or at least before this point. So it wasn't a question of, is it going to be a republic or not, but it's a question of who is going to be the monarch in a mostly constitutional monarchical system. So there is this gentleman on the screen, Carlos de Borbon. He is the Carlist, the namesake of this. This was an attempt by some forces in Spain, usually more conservative forces, who wanted to return towards a more absolutist monarchy, a traditional political structure, to make him the king. He is what was called an infante, which is the son of a king. But in both of these wars, the Carlist forces lost. The first one, I see it lasted for a lot of the 1830s, was a huge disruption to life in Spain. 5% of people in Spain died as a result of this war. Um, this also exacerbated, or was an example of, and increased the regional tensions in Spain. So modern Spain today is it has autonomous communities such as the Basque Country and Catalonia that have, especially since the end of the Franco dictatorship, which we will get to later, these places have seen a lot of movements of trying to be less Spanish, basically, or be more autonomous. Um, and a lot of that was showing during these wars. Um, Especially the Basque Country and Catalonia were hotbeds of Carlist support, not necessarily even for um, maybe his intended uh, changes that he wanted to make, but rather just because those areas felt that they would have more regional autonomy if he were king. But like I said, the Carlists were not successful, um, so there was no uh, widespread or deep political changes made at this point, but they are huge disruptions to Spain's political system, and they show how fragile that system can be. The queen, the monarch, for most of this period leading up to the 1868 revolution that leads to her ousting, is Queen Isabella II. Uh, and she was queen from 1833 to 1868. Uh, her reign was not necessarily marked by a lot of success in Spain. Um, she sees well, she becomes monarch at a very fraught time. Um, Obviously, seen with the Carlist Wars, there's a lot of political instability across the country. Uh, Spain is reeling from the long-term effects of Napoleon's intervention into Spain, especially economic effects, the loss of the colonies in the Americas, as previously discussed. And all of those things were contributing to an economically very unstable Spain, which created a lot of political instability as well. Um, there were This was a constitutional monarchy. She ruled with a parliament, um, and that parliament saw several instances of some coups trying to change or create a new constitution, civil wars, as in the Carlist Wars. So it's a very unstable time for Spain, uh, and her, I guess, demeanor or her style of ruling did not do much to fix these problems. Her personality was one that some of these revolutionaries that we will speak about did not like. It wasn't just the situation in Spain, but it was the fact that she maybe didn't have a lot of support personally from a lot of the people in Parliament. Her let's just say personal life was created a little bit of controversy in Spain. So her personality did not do a lot to help fix these problems, which is going to lead to the Glorious Revolution. This revolution, which is going to be very quick, is going to lead to Queen Isabella being defeated, basically, and she flees for France. So the mechanism of how it worked, in September of 1868, there were what is called some progressive generals. Um, Juan Prim, Francisco Serrano, worked with a naval commander, Juan Batista Topete. Topete actually sent a steamship to get Prim and Serrano and bring them back to Spain and to the mainland of Spain and institute this coup. So there was a quick coup led by these military commanders. There's Juan Prim over there on the right, who actually visited the United States around this time and met with Abraham Lincoln. But they met in the southern city of Cadiz and led this coup. It's quick. Isabella attempted to militarily defeat these generals, but there's one battle later in September 1868, those royalist forces lost. It's over. She flees and goes to France. So the military mechanisms of this revolution are pretty quick. But in the political aspects of the revolution are not nearly as successful as the military aspect of it. So the defeat of Isabella and now her absence leads to a period that in Spain is called the Sexenio Democrático, which is 6 years of democratic reforms in different manners. And there are 3 phases of this. So there's a provisional government that's created that exists from 1868 to 71. The Cortes, which is the Spanish parliament, makes a new constitution, 1869. And this is where this provisional government tries to basically tiptoe into this, and instead of creating a republic, they decide to create a constitutional monarchy, which is ceding some of their own power. And by doing that, they need to find a monarch. So what happens is they elect somebody from Italy, who becomes King Amadeo I of Spain. So in 1871, this Amadeo, Duke of Aosta from Italy, the House of Savoy, becomes Spain's new monarch. Things don't go very well. This is still a fraught time. There's still a lot of disagreements on what should happen, how Spain should be governed. And after about 3 years, Amadeo leaves and goes back to Italy. That then creates the first Spanish Republic, which only exists for a year. Parliament, the Cortes changes their mind. They go with the Republic. But then there is another little coup and a brief military dictatorship to the aforementioned Francisco Serrano that was instrumental in ousting Isabella, ends the first Spanish Republic. So that picture on the screen is from the proclamation of the Republic in engraving. So this was the first attempt, something a little more democratic in Spain, but it is very ineffective and obviously very short-lived, only a year. But continuing with this, there's a lot of issues going on in Spain. Juan Prim is assassinated. There's a lot of, just as an example of the political instability, his assassination. There's another Carlist war for who should be the leader of Spain after Amadeo was elected. Some people in Spain thought it should not be him. It should be someone a little more Spanish. So there is no success, basically long-term success of this 1868 revolution. It leads to a very quick republic, but then that republic is rather quickly ended, and now we have a restoration of the Bourbon monarchy. So the Bourbon Restoration, as you can see there, it lasts from 1874 to 1931, is a much longer, effect of this revolution. So I guess the effect here is that the revolution was unsuccessful, and we have a return to the monarchy, albeit not the same monarch, Queen Isabella, but a different monarch. And during this time, there is still a parliament, the Cortes, and there's a little more conservatism, a little bit more political stability, but still some tumultuous times. This is the time in Spanish history where there's a huge rise in some leftist organizations, especially socialist and anarchist groups. Spain is going to be a hotbed for anarchism, especially Barcelona. And during this time, the Spanish government basically institutes a policy called the Torno, which is purposefully there's two political parties, basically a kind of more liberal one and a kind of more conservative one, and they purposefully switch who has the majority in parliament every few years, um, using basically fraudulent elections to do this, to try to promote stability by alternating. This is also the time when Spain's standing as a world power continues to decline. Spain loses the Spanish-American War in 4 months in 1898. Spain, this is called El Desastre, losing Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. So even though there's some more political stability in Spain, Spain's standing in the world is not improving. Spain's economy has stabilized a bit, but has not fully recovered or continued to grow like many other industrializing countries at the time, like the United States. So this Bourbon monarchy, however, ends in 1931. King Alfonso XIII is deposed, and this is a more revolutionary time. 1931, another constitution that sets up the Second Spanish Republic. So this exists for a few years before there is another conservative reaction in the form of Francisco Franco and his military coup. So, Francisco Franco leads his army in Morocco back to mainland Spain, and this is when we get the Spanish Civil War. The Second Spanish Republic is defeated. Franco has help from Hitler and Mussolini in the form of military assistance. So the Republican armies are defeated. There is not much help that comes for the Republican armies, especially not any formal help. And now we have basically a fascist dictatorship. Franco becomes the caudillo, which is kind of like a military dictator. So he basically controls the Spanish state for almost 40 years. Franco, this is a very, very obviously conservative time in Spanish history. A lot of that regional autonomy that places like the Basque Country and Catalonia pushed for through the 19th century is gone. There's no actual political like any big and effective political resistance to Franco. So he rules until he dies, 1975. At which point, against what Franco had planned, but Spain is going to transition back into a democracy. There's a 1978 constitution, and that sets up the constitutional monarchy that Spain has today. There's a little more instability around this time, a quick little attempted military coup, but this constitution has held up, and now you've seen things like that regional autonomy return to places like the Basque Country and Catalonia, and Spain's government is a lot more stable today than almost any other time in its history since the 19th century. Some assessments of this revolution. What caused it? This 1868 revolution was caused mostly by just the continued political instability all through the 19th century in Spain, and the Spanish government's inability to respond to or effectively deal with issues related to Napoleon's intervention in Spain, and then the independence movements all through Spain's colonies in the Americas. The Carlist Wars, these civil wars, did not help either. So the political issues in Spain, just never being able to effectively, I guess, have a continued government, like a reliable, legitimate government in place, plus these other issues that hurt Spain economically to a very high degree, led to the situation in which some political generals would want to oust the queen. I think this fits in to the theories of revolutionary phases pretty well, just given that these events in 1868 and the years shortly after uh, are not, they did not exist in a vacuum. There are a lot of other similar instances all through the 19th century and early 20th century. So this is but one phase at an attempted reform of some liberal reforms without going far enough, let's say, to institute an actual republic. So yeah, the events of 1868 really seem like one phase of much grander set of political changes in Spain over decades. So it's kind of hard to really think about what type of revolution this is on its own, because it really does exist to all those other contexts in Spanish history around this time. But this is mostly a bourgeois revolution. These generals who had political and social standing were the ones who were pushing to oust the queen, and it's a coup. So yeah, there's a military aspect that gets rid of the queen, and then the attempt to reform Spain's government in a bourgeois manner. So thinking also about how revolutionary this really is, um, it is, I mean, yeah, getting rid of the queen in a military coup uh, was a big deal, but what the provisional government did in that Sexenio Democrático, the 6 years after her ousting, um, did not do enough to really create a lot of meaningful and lasting change. There were attempts at it, but those attempts were not effective enough to maintain themselves. Um, there are lots of other developments in Spanish history that I would categorize as being more revolutionary, like the establishment of the Second Republic in 1931, like Franco's coup and his implementation of a fascist state, and then the Constitution of 1978 that reverses that. I think that what happened after Queen Isabella was gone is not really enough to say that this is something that stands aside as something really unique in Spanish history. It seems to be more of a part of a really long series of events in the 19th century and early 20th century of just continued political instability. Furthermore, others, see, like the French Revolution and other revolutions in France, such as in 1848 or the Paris Commune in 1871, and then the American Revolution, Haitian Revolution, and then those Latin American wars of independence against Spain. Those all had more long-lasting, effective changes, and were able to defend themselves more than the government created by this revolution. And even though, as discussed, that there were outside events like elsewhere in Europe, like especially Napoleon's invasion, affected this, it really seems like more of a domestic issue in Spain of a government that is not able to function properly, and a monarch and Queen Isabella II who was not able to deal with the issues of the time, civil wars, like in the Carlist Wars, and the economic issues seem to have played the biggest role. And the fact that revolutions across Europe in 1848 did not really spread to Spain shows that Spain's issues in governing itself through the century not really isolated it from Europe, but Spain was not as affected by the waves of revolution seen as in years like 1848. So, in conclusion, the Glorious Revolution. I mean, it did have some revolutionary aspects to it, certainly ousting a monarch, attempting to implement a new system of government with a new constitution and then attempting a republic. But the fact that all through the 1800s, after Napoleon's invasion, all the way up until 1931, and with the establishment of the Second Republic, Spain had a lot of instances of similar events wherein Spain's government was ineffective. There's a lot of instability, and changes are seen. So even though, yeah, it was revolutionary in some ways, I don't think it was enough to make it stand aside as something entirely unique. And then there's a bibliography. Thank you for watching.